Hi, everybody. I think we're going to get started with the second part of the event, which is our panels. My name is Patricia Foxen, and I'm the Associate Director of Research at the National Council of La Raza. So we have some very esteemed speakers from the world of research, advocacy, service provision, and what did I miss? Policy, who are going to be addressing some of the issues that have been highlighted in the report and already today from the perspective of their own organizations or disciplines and their own knowledge. The first panel is titled "Pressing Challenges Facing Latina Immigrants: Voices from the Community." And the second panel is Strategies for Advocacy and Change, Building Latina Leadership. So for the sake of time, I am not going to do lengthy introductions, but you can refer to the speaker bios that you've received. I'll introduce all three of our first speakers right now. We have Dr. Pierluigi Mancini, who's the founder and executive director of SETPA, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing affordable, linguistic, and culturally appropriate behavioral health services to the Latino community in Georgia. And Dr. Mancini's areas of specialty are mental illness and addiction. We also have with us Lydia Guzman. Excuse me, wrong speaker. But she will be speaking later. Sorry about that. Our second speaker is Jen Smyers, who serves as the Associate Director for Immigration and Refugee Policy with the Church World Service. In this position, she advocates for improved assistance for refugees resettled in the U.S. and humane immigration reform. And our third speaker is Dr. Cecilia Menjivar, who's the Cowden Distinguished Professor of Sociology in the School of Social and Family Dynamics at Arizona State University. Her research is focused on various aspects of immigrant incorporation, including immigrant social and kin networks, gender and generational relations, and religion and the place of the church in individuals' lives. And she's written and co-edited numerous books and articles on these subjects. So without further ado, Dr. Mancini.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be with you today. I would like to thank the National Council of La Raza, the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and the Institute for Women's Policy Research for inviting me to be a part of this important release. As Georgia's only Latino behavioral health agency, my staff and I witnessed the aftermath of the emotional damage that all the rules, policies, and proposals and laws inflict on Latinos in Georgia on a daily basis. It is the aftermath of living in an environment of fear and misinformation. Latina women and Latina girls in particular seem to bear the heaviest burden of these actions. Let me begin with a recent episode. My agency, SETPA, has a prevention branch that works with over 300 Latina girls and boys throughout the year, teaching them refusal skills to avoid the pitfalls of alcohol and drugs, gangs, and other risks, and teaching them the resiliency skills needed to help them stay in school and achieve academic success. One of the aspects of the program is teaching a prevention curriculum, and the other aspect is teaching the girls how to dance. At the end of the year, they have a very large community event to celebrate everything that they have learned. This year's event just happens to be tomorrow, so if you're in Atlanta, you're invited. They have become so popular that they are often invited to dance at different events. Just last week, our girls experienced a traumatic moment that almost caused them to miss a performance. The girls were invited to dance at the prestigious Fernbank Science Museum for Georgia's Governor Nathan Deal, as he presented a proclamation for the 2011 Red Ribbon Campaign in Georgia. The girls danced beautifully and everyone enjoyed their show. Immediately after this event, the girls were scheduled to perform at another event, this one celebrating a statewide collaborative for children's services. The event was held at the Loudermilk Center, located next to the United Way building in Atlanta. As the van carrying the girls approached the parking lot, the building's security guard, wearing a standard blue blazer with a sewn-on security patch on the front pocket, approached the van to give instructions for parking. One of the girls, upon seeing the guard approaching the van, yelled in a panic, "La migra." Most of the girls' faces went pale, and several girls broke down in tears. It took our staff several minutes to calm the girls down, and thankfully they were able to perform as scheduled without anyone noticing their trauma. This happened to U.S.-born Latina girls on U.S. soil in their hometown on a Sunday, Thursday morning. The trauma can be directly related to the current state of anxiety that many Latino families in Georgia are living under. Anxiety created by rules, policies, bills, and laws that inject fear into immigrant communities, regardless of immigration status. Many Latino children and adolescents are harmed by an immigration policy leading to the arrest, detainment, and often deportation of their parents or other relatives. Children as young as 4 have been passengers in cars driven by their parents who were stopped for a minor traffic violation. Unable to produce a driver's license was enough to detain and arrest them with expectation of deportation. Some arrests have been made for fishing without a license. Others are the result of worksite roundups. And there seems to be no requirements in place to let the children at home know when their parents are removed. The consequences are wrenching. Several counties in Georgia participate in the 287G program, allowing local law enforcement empowered by federal government to initiate deportation. These broad powers are often misunderstood, and they have even led to the deportation of a U.S. citizen of Puerto Rican descent who was deported to Mexico. Many people fear that anything more than looking Hispanic or having poor English language skills will get them arrested. There are checkpoints and roadblocks near schools, churches, daycare centers, and health clinics. Threats to family stability is leading children to experience feelings of anxiety, depression, agitation, withdrawal, anger, or clinginess. Problems with eating habits or difficulty sleeping are also common. Mothers are expected to take care of these issues, but without any supports or abilities available to them. The number one reason appointments are canceled at our clinic is fear of leaving the safety of the home. Fears of deportation are shared by both legal permanent residents and undocumented immigrants. Many Latino families have what is termed mixed families, with some members as citizens or residents, and others still in process or undocumented living together. Everyone shares the anxiety, and everyone pays the price. One aspect of these rules, proposals, bills, and laws is that it is sending this underserved or newly termed "I don't want to serve" community deeper into an underground full of subpar health care and other services. It is making a vulnerable community that much more vulnerable, and is keeping them from fully living or pursuing the American dream. We must remember that in Georgia, the Latino community's explosive growth is attributed to people responding to Georgia's request for help to prepare Atlanta for the 1996 Olympics. Latinos were recruited and sometimes even picked up from neighboring Mexico. And in addition to building for the Olympics, many found work in construction, agriculture, and the carpet industry. At first, Georgia welcomed their culture organized around family and church, and the Latino population swelled near 300% in a single decade. But no more, even though immigrant labor is still expected to harvest Vidalia onions, pecans, and peaches. Last week, the results of the 2010 census were released, and Georgia's results demonstrated several important shifts. The Latino and the Asian communities almost doubled from 2000 to 2010, and several major counties in Georgia are now what is termed minority-majority counties, meaning that the non-Hispanic white population in these counties is now below 50%. What we must remember is that just like the girls I mentioned at the beginning, Georgia's Olympic babies are turning 18, and it's going to be difficult for them to forget how much they were made to suffer by watching their parents and grandparents suffer in silence, be mistreated, be deported, or die while trying to provide a better life to their families. Latina immigrant women face many challenges within their families. more so than women in general. Not to minimize the fact that women in general face many challenges, but to emphasize the fact that besides the general issues faced by women who are raising families, Latina immigrants are having to face the uncertainty of whether they will be returning home or their husbands will be returning home at the end of the day. They must make life-altering decisions of whether to risk driving, even if they have a valid driver's license, to go to the doctor, take their children to school, or go to the grocery store. They will go without food, healthcare, medications, and other basic life necessities because of fears caused by uncalled rules, policies, bills, and laws. Women are left without husbands, all alone to take care of raising a family in a dark and uncertain environment. Children are left without parents, left to a foster care system that does not have, as members, Latino families that can help keep the culture and language alive. In one instance, we had a Latina mother that, because of her addiction, lost her kids to the foster care system, which placed them in an English-speaking household. 6 months later, when she was able to see her children again, they had forgotten all of their Spanish and could not communicate with their mother, which sent her into a suicidal episode. Our Latina Women's Trauma Group continues to grow. We continue to see an increase of Latina women presenting with depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and acculturation problems. Yesterday, there was a march in Atlanta with almost 10,000 people marching to the Georgia Capitol to protest House Bill 87 and Senate Bill 40, bills that have been termed Arizona copycat bills and carry many restrictions to services and many rules that will continue to inflict fear and anxiety to a vulnerable population and continue to drive that community further underground. History does, in fact, teach us many lessons. The problem is that often we choose not to learn from history's lessons. The reports of anxiety and fear we hear on a daily basis strike a similar chord as previous world events that caused children to live in fear, anxious of their parents being taken away, and having to live a hidden, often difficult life. Actually, my 7th grader just finished reading a book about a girl who was in that situation many years ago. Some of you may know the book I mean. My fear is that unless we take appropriate steps now to fully explain what is happening, unless we write rules, policies, bills, and laws that take into account the damage they may cause, unless we act now, who knows, maybe in 50 years, our children's children will be reading a book in school about the tragedies, the fears, and the anxieties that led to a traumatic life from one of the girls in the van. If we allow the continued dissemination of fear and misunderstanding into immigrant communities, we're allowing the destruction of families and the destruction of innocent childhoods of American citizens. Thank you very much.
I think so, yes.
All right. Well, I also want to add my name to the list of people thanking everybody who's been a part of this. This is a remarkable effort by the researchers at the Institute for Women's Policy Research, because I have never seen in the academic literature or in any literature something similar to what they did. So this is, I think, a report that is going to be a standard reference for the work of organizations, but also the work we do in academia. So I also want to thank them for all this. The report is incredibly rich and it has information at all levels, and it's beautifully crafted. So I'm going to just take one slice of it and connect it to my own work, and it will resonate and echo some of the points you just made, Dr. Mancini. As the report indicates, family separation is particularly devastating for women because they are often left in charge of these children when their husbands or male partners are deported. In addition to that, women themselves are often afraid of, live in fear of deportation, and as they face the threat of being separated from their children who lived with them here. But also, a deportation also hinders their ability to provide for their children back home. Family separation happens either as a result of deportation, which can happen through traffic stops, in Phoenix, the crime suppression sweeps that we hear about, or through workplace inspections or the raids that we hear about in the news. But they also have, family separation also happens when women migrate themselves alone as breadwinners for their families, and because they see the need to provide for their children and other family members back home. And so the women leave their children back home, often in the care of other women, initiating these chains of care that we read about in research. Immigration law is related to family separations in multiple ways, either separating parents and mothers and children who are in the United States, but also in keeping families apart when women and men migrate, and making it very difficult, almost impossible, for them to reunite with their families here. And it is something that affects not only immigrants in legally unstable situations, but also their family members who have regular statuses, and U.S. citizenship as well. And as the report very perceptively notes, there are two kinds of policies that are particularly powerful for immigrant women. Those policies that determine access to services, what we often refer to as immigration policy, and those that are related to immigrant policy, and those that relate to enforcement, which deal with controlling the numbers of immigrants into the country. Both types of policies affect women and men, but as the report notes, those at the state and local levels have a particular effect on women. This happens because these policies, those that determine access and have been more and more focusing on families and children, affect women in particular ways in their roles as mothers. In my work, I have been in various cities around the country, but in the past several years in Phoenix, I have been examining the effects of the law in the lives of immigrants and how immigrants perceive the effects of the law in their lives. And in that work, I have interviewed women and men about how they perceive the law and how they understand the law in their lives. So I'll share a couple of points from my work related to what I've been able to glean from my work. I think some of the views from the immigrants I have interviewed over the years complement in many ways what the report shows that the organizations are doing. Both women and men, for instance, worry about the threat of deportation or about the well-being of their family members back home. What can happen to the children here if they are deported, or what may happen to the children back home during times of separation. And there's no question about that. Both experience parenthood both experience the law as affecting parenthood in different ways. But given gender ideologies and gender role expectations, women and men make sense and understand the law and speak about their experiences in different ways. For instance, in interviews, men usually bring up concerns about how a deportation can hamper their efforts to provide for their families, how a deportation can affect their roles as breadwinners for their families, and how deportation can undermine their ability to fulfill those roles. Women often do this too because they are also breadwinners. And they also provide, they're breadwinners for their families here, but they're also breadwinners for their families back home. But women also bring up quite forcefully how immigration policies affect their daily lives and how a deportation threatens their roles as mothers. How new immigration policies can separate them from their children or hinder their efforts to provide for their children back home. They also talk about how immigration policies and federal immigration law hinders their efforts or any strategies or any attempts to reunite with their families. And so they often speak about how the law affects their abilities to mother their children here and there. For instance, one woman in Phoenix was telling me how she and her husband have worked together cleaning model homes at night, and how the new the state and local level laws in Phoenix have affected their daily lives, and how they have to calculate almost everything they do. For instance, in her words, look, Cecilia, this situation is scary. It gives us fear. Every day, I don't lie to you, it's constant. So no, we don't drive together. What if we are stopped and get deported? We'll be taken to jail. And the kids, what? Who's going to take care of them? Who's going to stay with them? We worry. We live anguished. So her husband goes in one car with our neighbor, and I go in another car with my cousin. The same when we go to the market. He goes in one car and I go in another. So no, we try to never in the same car. Who knows what can happen? We need to be careful. We must take precautions that way, unquote. So she brings up these, for her, are her main fears. And this is how they organize their lives around this potential threat of deportation. It's which highlights their deportability, this constant risk of deportation, and of course the fear and terror it creates. And her husband, when I talked to her husband, he also, of course, is very concerned about what he can drive. He often rides a bicycle because he thinks that's a little bit safer than driving. But he highlights his position as breadwinner. What can happen if he is deported? He will not be able to provide for the children and for his mother back home. And another point that I want to make about these family separations is that during the time of separation, when the children are back home, the children tend to reproach the mothers more than the fathers for what they sometimes perceived as abandonment. And abandonment, thank you. Abandonment, they often perceive it this way because of these long-term, very uncertain separations. Nobody really knows when they're going to see each other again, given how immigration law is structured. And they perceive it as abandonment even if the mothers are working 2-3 jobs here in the United States to be able to send them money back home. So the threat of deportation tends to have a particularly detrimental effect, just like the report shows, on women. And during the time of separation from their children, women experience it in different ways. They worry about providing for their children financially and materially, but they also worry about emotional ties and the care that they can or cannot provide for their children, and the potential separation that will affect how they can provide this care. For instance, and this I'll just end with this one other example from a Guatemalan woman who explained that she often had to decide whether to buy more calling cards to phone her children back home, or to send that money to provide for them to buy food and school uniforms back home. And this also highlights the economic vulnerability of these women here who cannot do both, either buy the calling cards and stay in touch with the children and foment those emotional ties, or send them money to buy food and school uniforms. So as a mother, she sees both roles as being part of what she's supposed to do: provide for the children, but also provide these emotional ties that are often that she finds very difficult to fulfill. And I'll just end with that because I don't want to go over time, and we can talk during the question period.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Menjivar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm honored to be here and just want to echo all the thanks that's been given to all the researchers and organizers who have been part of this event and of the releasing of the report itself. And I really want to echo all of these sentiments that I enjoyed reading the report very much because it really rings true with what we're seeing across the spectrum, not only in the three locations studied, but really across the United States. I work for an organization that's called Church World Service, and we're an ecumenical body of 37 different mainly Protestant religious denominations. And then we also work in refugee resettlement and legal services to immigrants in 34 different sites across the country. And so it resonated with me as a member of a service providing agency and as an advocate. I work here in Washington, D.C. as an advocate for immigration reform, and then also as a religious body. So I read it from a lot of different angles and really appreciated the depth that the report brings to all three of those scenarios. So the recommendations were very helpful, I think, as a service providing agency and as an advocate, because it really linked the systematic problems with our current immigration system and also some of the gaps that aren't being focused on and service providing agencies and in faith communities. I want to say I've been in this current position for 4 years, and really over that 4-year period, religious organizations have been more actively engaged on immigration related issues than ever before. When I first started, it was really trying to get people to, be advocates on immigration issues, and now I have people calling me asking me for advice on how they can be involved. And I think that a lot of that is because of the realities that are highlighted in the report. We're seeing the incredible detriment of family separation because of raids, because of what was discussed before, the 287G program, and I would add to that the Secure Communities program, because of arbitrary arrests, detention, deportation of community members. And the churches, and for that matter, all religious bodies and service providers are on the front lines. So we had one Catholic sister, actually, who said, this is the equivalent to a natural disaster. We've only engaged in this type of human suffering when there's been a tornado or a hurricane in our location. This is a government-imposed disaster when it comes to raids and deportation of mainly breadwinners, because you have people who are afraid. They don't want to leave their home. They don't want to go to church. They don't want to go to the grocery store. They don't want to be at the bus stop with their children. And then also economically, they're facing not having a breadwinner's salary because that person's been deported. So it's very, very, very powerful, and our communities are certainly responding to that in terms of greater services being provided, as well as being engaged in advocacy on a local and a national level. And in that way, the report is very difficult to read in some cases because it highlights the extreme suffering that our communities are going through. And I think that makes it very powerful. I've already kind of highlighted pieces that I'm going to be sending to my friends who make and keep some of these policies happening, because it really shows that we have counterproductive policies on the national and local levels that are not only keeping people from being able to fully integrate in our communities, but are creating, and if not creating, certainly exacerbating human suffering. There are a few links that I just wanted to highlight. The report highlights some challenges and some barriers for Latina immigrants, including economic hardship, exploitation that people face, lack of certain skills or education, violence that people face, access to health services, access to transportation, and family separation. And in one way or another, all of those things are directly linked to two pieces, and one is lack of status for people, or the perception that their status could keep them from reporting a crime or keep them from reporting exploitation, and then fear. So that lack of status and that fear component is really seen in every single challenge that the report addresses and every barrier that the report documents. And the lack of status is directly linked to the lack of any type of leadership or moral courage in the U.S. Congress, and I would say from the Obama administration, to enact a type of immigration reform that would result in a change of status for people, an opportunity to change that status. And that fear is directly linked to anti-immigrant laws in localities and states, as well as counterproductive measures such as 287G, secure communities, and similar programs that have been implemented across the country. So we're really seeing in that regard links in terms of barriers and challenges and public policy. I want to highlight the impact that this has on religious communities in particular, because we find it increasingly challenging to even preach the gospel, as my more theologically minded friends might say, in terms of telling people not to fear, because we can't guarantee that people can come to services and there won't be a police officer asking for status afterwards. We've tried to do that before, and we've seen time and time again people who are picked up on their way from church services, on their way to church. There's actually just an article recently about a congregation in North Carolina where they were on their way in a church van and they were pulled over and detained, and the women in this particular religious Christian congregation wore head coverings, and they were actually told by the police officers, why do you wear those? You look stupid. Do you wear those so you don't have to brush your hair? And actually the women were praying with their children and singing hymns in the office while their husbands and partners were being detained, and the police officers said to them, let's see if your God can save you from this. So we're not only seeing racial profiling, but we are seeing specifically derogatory comments made towards women and to members of religious groups. And so they're all one and the same, really, and they all stem from the same place. While reading the report, there are so many pieces that I just circled and highlighted in terms of people talking about their immigration status being asked when they have called 911, having home invasion raids, which are not talked about as often as workplace raids, so I appreciate that the report brought them up, and other places. And I think it is beholden on church communities and religious communities to start building stronger, more welcoming communities. And one of the ways that we've started to do that is to be a broker, really, between communities that fear really standing up for their own rights and local police agencies, where we were able to sometimes communicate on the risks and the negative consequences of some of these policies. But really, there's one part of the report that really hammers this home, which is without the proper policy changes, all of these challenges will continue to be less than fully addressed. And I want to echo that. I think that when we look at family separation policies, and I'll call them policies because we still haven't addressed the backlog in family visas, when we look at the exploitation of immigrant women in particular, but immigrants overall in terms of labor, and when we see the need for policies like immigration reform that are continuing to go unmet, it really strikes a chord. And when we look at the intention of some of these policies on the federal level and how they're being carried out locally, we're seeing an intention and people saying one thing on the federal side, and the way that they're being implemented and the impact that they have on communities really creating a terror state. So that's specifically important, and I'm glad that the report addresses that. So in sum, communities are suffering from these policies, and immigrant women in particular. And Congress has not acted, and the administration has not acted in the way that they need to change these policies, so advocacy becomes even more important. And if we want to bring about justice for victims of domestic violence and other crimes, if we want to bring about justice in terms of exploitation, if we want to bring about community safety, integration, any type of semblance of integrity of our immigration system, if we want to stop hurting our communities and stop the suffering that's going on, then we need to stop counterproductive, harmful policies like 287G and secure communities. We need to provide a pathway to legal status for those who are undocumented, and we need to make sure, as the report focuses on, that we're linking those community programs with an increase in advocacy on a local and national level and continuing to build those relationships. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to the speakers. It's so important to be getting those voices from the community directly out there, and also from the organizations that are working with Latina immigrants. And since I have the advantage of having the microphone right in front of me, I'm just going to cheat a little bit and throw out a first question, which is something that struck me both about the report and all of your talks, and especially something you said at the end, Jen. Is just the incredible interconnectedness of all of this. You know, whether you're talking about family separation and immigration policy, or women in the labor force, and, you know, those issues, whether you're talking about devastating mental health problems that are resulting from all of this, I think it's very clear that those interconnections are vital to understand. Do you think that at the level of policy and policymakers, that interconnectedness and the incredible suffering that happens as a result of that is understood?
I would have to say no, because I believe that if it was understood, then people would actually do something about it. And maybe that's myself as an optimist. I don't think so. I think that oftentimes when we meet with folks on the national level, they will say these things aren't happening. And that's why I'm really appreciative not only of the quantitative data, but the qualitative testimonies and quotes in this report that we can put in front of people and highlight these links. I think when it comes to the religious institutions, we are a little bit slow to get involved in the game. I think that we've increased religious participation, religious institutions' participation in service provision and advocacy very much in the last few years, but I don't think that those links are really understood on the policymaker level, and so we're seeking to do that, but I think this report is a positive step in that direction, and we can all work together to do that more.
Great, thanks.
I think in some circles it's probably not understood, and in fact, in some of my writings, I refer to all this as the unintended consequences of immigration law, because in enforcing in border policies and immigration policy inside the country, policies are created that and people do not understand what the far-reaching consequences can be. But there is also another level, and I think other public officials are very well aware of the fear they're creating. And in fact, some of these policies are crafted with the intention of creating fear and terror in several communities. And when they see the results, they think that this is working, as in the case of Arizona, where there is a concerted effort to create policies that will deter people from coming in and will make people leave. And the mayor of, I think it was Hazleton in Pennsylvania, said that he was creating policy to make it the toughest, most anti-immigrant city in the United States. And that's, so I think when public officials declare that, then we have to think that they are understanding what they're creating.
Okay, so great. We have some questions. If you could just introduce yourself and speak into a mic. Right here.
I'm Catherine Campbell. I'm an Episcopal priest in charge of 2 Latino congregations in Arlington, Virginia. And I live in Prince William County in Virginia. And one of my concerns is that during the last election, or last couple of elections in Prince William County, in talking to some of the Democrats and asking them what are they trying to do to foster the Latino vote, they said it did not behoove them to do so because the fear-mongering in the county was such that they didn't even want to reach out to the Latinos. And how do you advocate in that kind of situation? And my question goes to advocacy. And I've heard so many different policy people tell me that, well, marches don't work because they just increase the fear factor. And so that's not good advocacy. So what is efficient advocacy that we in the religious community can actually do, and how do we counter folks that basically feel that the fear-mongering is such a powerful force that there is no counter to it.
That's quite a good question. And I mean, it's a question that we try to address every day. And I think that there's no one thing that is a win, this is the best way to do something. I mean, I think in terms of the Latino vote, it's of course important to educate people that, well, Latinos are voters and they are increasingly members of our communities, especially in Prince William County. And so turning away from speaking to Latinos is obviously a bad strategy. And I think that history will come to show that, as a lot of politicians are seeing the realities of voter turnout there. I think in terms of the religious community, it's important for us to make sure that politicians know that immigrants' rights are human rights, and it's not a Latino issue only, it's not an immigrant issue only, it's a community issue. And that as pastors, as people of faith, we are standing in solidarity with our immigrant brothers and sisters, and we will vote against candidates who are anti-immigrant. And we will take a stand against policies that are bad for our communities. I think that as religious organizations and as churches, we have a great opportunity to build relationships, not only with immigrants in our community, but also with people who have misconceptions about immigrants, and starting to facilitate that dialogue and take a more public stand. It is difficult, but I think many congregations have done it, and there's really been a benefit to it in building stronger, more welcoming communities and saying we're all in this together.
Great. And also, did you want to?
Briefly, I also think what we like to tell people is that some action is better than no action. One of the challenges, interestingly enough, that we're seeing is Latinos who can speak out, those that vote, are often very slow to step up to the plate. So we need to encourage those Latinos that are able to make a difference with their vote to do so.
And I was just going to say our second panel is titled Strategies for Advocacy and Change, so we'll probably have more discussion about this as well.
Hi, I'm Gabriela Sanchez, Arizona State University. I just came from there, and I'm at the University of Maryland in College Park. I want to thank you guys for the amazing report, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And I think I really appreciate all of your comments on on highlighting the dynamics of immigration, the impact on enforcement. But I also would like to hear some comments about resiliency and agency. And that's because, most of the discourse that we hear about immigration focuses on all of this suffering and all of the pain that our communities are enduring. And there's very few scholars who have actually gone and say, this is where we see agency. This is where we see a response from the community. I keep thinking about, that example that you gave about the people in the van. I'm a former undocumented immigrant, and I spent 10 days in immigration detention. And I remember, and I haven't told this to anybody, but I just thought that I will share it with you today. I had to, immigration sent me, along with other 50 women on a plane, and I think it was from Las Vegas to San Diego back in '99. And everybody was quiet. I think everybody was just kind of like, okay, they are sending us back, fine. And then a woman started to sing. And the marshals started going, oh, shut up, you're not supposed to sing. Everybody started to sing. And then by the end, everybody was talking to each other, everybody was happy, everybody knew that they were going home. But they were probably going to try again, a lot of them. But that moment, that resistance, that opposition to, okay, you have power, you have a certain degree of power, this is what I can do, this is my power. And I think that's very important, for advocates that are here today, also because we see that on the people. Okay, they still go to work, they still grab the bicycles and, the men go and they stand right there at the corner even knowing that Sheriff Joe is coming. We still do all of these things. So I would like to see some of that, in our discourse, that the incorporation of that, that notion of resiliency and agency. Thank you.
Just great. I really appreciate your saying that. I think I mentioned earlier I'm from the University of Maryland, Dorothy Grant Wisdom. I also wanted to just add to that to say, couldn't you also expose who is benefiting from the detention centers, that kind of thing? I think that would wake up a lot of people. It wakes up my students at least.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And I was wondering, one of the problems that I keep hearing is that there is research, or some people claim that all of these undocumented aliens, or they call them aliens, are costing localities a lot of money. Because they use services and they're undocumented, the litany, right? And then I hear, no, they're not, because they're afraid to use the services. Not only that, they're working and they're paying taxes. And in some cases, they're not going to get the benefit of the Social Security and unemployment and stuff because they can't claim it because they're undocumented. Is there definitive research that can show states the impact, positive and negative, to the economies? Ultimately, governors and county governments and mayors, that's all they care about. So is there any way, any convincing evidence of whether it's positive or negative, the impact on the economy?
I just want to say that the Immigration Policy Center puts out a series of reports, and they go state by state on specifically that question on the economic impact of immigration to the state. So that might be something that you'd want to look at then.
But those people don't believe research anyway, right?
Well, but you asked whether there's research on this, and there is. Yes. The institute, but also the Urban Institute and the Pew Hispanic Center. Those are the three main centers that have produced very good research, similar to the report we have here. And since your question was whether there is research, yes, there is.
And does it demonstrate that it's a positive impact versus a negative impact?
Yes, they present a complex picture. Yes. It's a complex picture because it's based on data that they collect, yes.
In the back.
Hi, Lynn Heffron from Diversity Spectrum Corporation here in Washington. I'm interested in what interface you have had through your individual efforts or your organizations with the business community that hires documented and undocumented workers, that is helping also sometimes counterproductively to the same people they've just hired to do the work. So I'm wondering, what is the outreach from your organizations or your experience in the role of the business community, and what suggestions, perhaps as the next panel as well, for advocacy for how to help that business community help you?
That's a very good question. I can share with you my experience that varies with the business community. Fear and misinformation also exists in what are the rules before I hire someone. Agencies are supposed to be collecting all this information using controversial sites like E-Verify. But when it came down to it, when I first opened this agency, it was one of my offices was in an area that had very high Latino community, and it had many poultry plants. And that, of course, it's very, very hard work. And I've gone into poultry plants, and most of the employees were Latinos. And I went in to talk to the owners, to the managers, about implementing substance abuse and mental health services. And their direct quote to me was, we're not going to spend that kind of money, because if they leave or if they take them away, there are 10 others in the corner that can take their place. So there is very mixed messages that comes from them. The other part has to do with policies that don't punish those employers. What's a $500 fine? What's a $1,000 fine? And major corporations in the United States have been busted carrying immigrants to come work in poultry plants, and all they get is a very small financial fine. So there's not, so far from what I've seen, not a lot of investment at this point.
I think in terms of the business community, we have heard a lot about what employers do individually. But for instance, when the business community realizes the effects of all this on their interest, they act and act quickly. In Arizona, the legislature just voted down 5 new immigration bills that would have made SB 1070 look like child's play. But it was the business community, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, that wrote a letter to the governor and to the legislators to not pass these 5 bills, because the boycott to Arizona is hurting businesses tremendously. So they specify that, and the legislature did not pass those 5 bills. So,
my name is Marlene Dofield. I'm a psychotherapist in Northern Virginia, and we have a lot of cases like that. I have two things to say. I'd like to know the percentage you have of multicultural organization working in Northern Virginia, because we're facing, every time I go to work and I work with some group, the men complain, nobody understands us. They could speak Spanish, English from Jamaica, Haitian from Haiti, but it seems like everybody wants us to change like them, and we are afraid to say what we think really. And the other thing is about the consequence on the young kid. We are facing a lot of delinquency from the children, because when they have been rejected because mom is not there, mom have been deported, and I'm afraid to say my mom have been deported. I'm afraid to say what happened with my mom. So they regroup, and one telling the other one what to do. So we have the behavior, the emotional, and everything going to reflect in the next generation of Americans, mostly all of them born here. So we're going to face a bigger challenge. So I wonder if somebody is thinking about that really.
Well, I thank you. That's a very good question as well. And we're actually already witnessing some of the aftermath of what's going on. We're seeing traumatized Latino youth, and this happened to at least 2 that I know of in Georgia, who were kicked out of their district for fighting. And these are 13, 14-year-olds. And fighting was their only defense mechanism because of the trauma that they had experienced in their lives. So nobody was willing to look at the trauma. They were just willing to implement, kick them out of the district. So now these 2 bright young men don't have a school to go to, and we're trying to figure out how we educate them so we don't lose those lives. There's also studies that show that Latino immigrants coming to this country with much better mental health. And as time goes by, they're in higher need of mental health services. And, we're seeing that with Latino youth as well. We know that Latino youth that come into this country, having never used a drug in their life, fall very quickly into the general social adolescent culture and end up being poly-drug users or trying drugs for the first time within a year of arriving in the United States.
Andrea Imhoff, DC Rape Crisis Center and Polaris Project again. Dr. Mancini, do you see any mental health disparities on the types of conditions, specifically between men and women, and also between children that are boys and girls?
From the general population?
From the population that you work with directly.
With adult males, primarily we do see substance abuse, but we're starting to see anxiety and depression at higher numbers. Latina women is anxiety and depression almost across the board, even though we are seeing some serious cases at the same levels of the general population, such as schizophrenia. For children and adolescents, it's kind of heartbreaking story. We started our play therapy program in September as a test program for young kids ages 3, 4, 5, with the goal of having 2 to 4 children in the program. Within 6 weeks, we had 45 kids in this program. We had to hire 3 other therapists and build an additional play therapy room. So we're seeing these kids coming in with trauma, coming in with some issues that are not very common in general, like elective mutism, children that have witnessed a traumatic event and then stop speaking because of that traumatic event. In women, we're also seeing some aspect of panic disorder. A lot of the times is not being able to understand very well what is going on in their lives. And with adolescents, we are seeing some conduct disorder, even though I always like to say diagnosing adolescence is one of the most difficult things to do because it's an adolescence period, and there may be things that may be just part of adolescence and not necessarily a label that we need to place in youth. But we are seeing children with conduct disorder and with substance abuse issues.
If I could just pipe in a little bit as well, one of the things that we see at NCLR in our research is also, the sort of the mental health impacts of discrimination and everything that's been talked about today on women, on children, on men. And I want to connect this to something that you said about resiliency and needing to put that out there as well, because we're seeing such devastating issues right now, and especially obviously at clinics like yours. But what we're also seeing when we've gone around and done focus groups and interviews is, this incredible resiliency. Women who are so strong in the face of so many struggles, and documenting, what allows these women and their children as well to be resilient and to really make the case and send out the message that if we want a future generation of Latinos, and as we all know with all the census data coming out, there's going to be a lot of Latinos, we need to really cultivate that resiliency, whether it's in Latina women, men, or children. So just wanted to add that.
I like to echo that as well. I think that whenever I talk to congregations about how are we going to get over this rate or how are we going to do something, I just tell them to learn from the immigrants in their communities, because they are ready to meet the challenge. And I think the one thing that really comes to mind is the failure of the DREAM Act to pass. I work in the United Methodist building that's right across the street from the Capitol, and we had about 300 DREAM eligible students who were there and who were going back and forth in the Capitol, and I was being the person at the door letting everybody in and out. So I was watching it on C-SPAN, and I was just in tears afterwards, and everyone was, and I was still feeling down the rest of the day, and everyone was in the building, and by the end of the day, all of the DREAM students, regardless of the fact that it was their lives that were impacted and not mine, my personal life from the failure of the DREAM Act, but I had 12 of them sleeping on my floor that night, and they had a party, and they celebrated each other, and they said, we're not giving up. We're going to continue to do this. And so for me, I just felt selfish and very narrow in my view, because they were so resilient. And I think that we all can learn from that in fighting against these bad policies and advocating for better ones.
Actually, that was my question, was about the DREAM Act. And what are we doing to capitalize on the resiliency that we saw and the bubbling up of new leaders? How do we help those students step into leadership roles? Where are we making the on-ramps for new leaders coming out of all of that work around the country?
One of the things that we're doing is we're actually having DREAM students be the trainers that we have at our conferences to train our church folks on how to do work, mainly because our church people are much more accountable to a DREAM student asking them to do something than me. And so that's been really effective. So it's a small way that we're doing it. I think there's a lot of ideas in the works about how we can capitalize on that, but that's one small way that we're moving forward.
So unless anybody has anything to add, we need to move on to our next panel. So I wanted to thank everybody. That was a wonderful discussion.